Welcome back to Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality more than just skin deep. On June 26, 2015, marriage equality became the law of the land in the United States of America. Or so it seemed, because disabled people who were receiving disability benefits were and still are not able to marry without losing their benefits. This month is Disability Pride Month, so that's our topic. I'm Enzi, your host. Let's get it going. It wasn't until recently that I began to identify as disabled. It's fascinating because up until that time, I even had a disability placard sticker for my car and have struggled with mental health issues as well as physical and chronic pain. And yet I still didn't identify as disabled. I'm not really sure why not. Perhaps I felt like that was not a part of my community or a place that I should have been claiming those identities. Earlier this year, I began to realize and embrace myself as a disabled individual. I had the privilege and ability to be a part of a fellowship with disabled Jewish organizers or folks who were looking at becoming organizers. And during that time, my understanding of disability justice and accessibility has drastically shifted. And part of this episode, I want to address and talk with us about disability pride, about some constant or misconceptions possibly, but also I want to just kind of highlight some realities and some things that oftentimes occur. So I started this episode off by talking about marriage equality and how folks who are receiving disability benefits are not able to keep the benefits once they marry a person. And the other thing is there's an asset limit to what folks are able to have. And so our society is set up in ways to where we talk about equity and equality and liberation, but there is no equity, there is no equality, there is no liberation as long as disabled people are not given equal ability to do things. Sometimes we talk about things as special needs, and I want to kind of push back and encourage us to think about them not as special needs, but as access needs, right? Because when we say special needs, we are setting up folks, young people, adults, anyone who struggle or who may operate their lives differently as special needs, as something different. And we all have the need to survive, the right to thrive, and the ability to care for ourselves and for our community in a very holistic and equitable way. How do we get there? One of the things we oftentimes forget is the importance of including everyone at all times, at every aspect of whatever the project is that we're working on. How often, when you're having meetings or trainings, do you make sure that there's an ASL interpreter present? That's very important. Small things like putting image descriptions on pictures, because there might be people in your community who may be have vision issues, and it's important that we want to include everyone, right? Because as we talk about movements and justice and rights, we want to include everyone. But more so, it's really important to include those who are most vulnerable as well. And we oftentimes, whether intentionally or unintentionally, leave whole communities out of the equation. How do we do this? Right? How do we make our movements, our communities, our protests, our rallies equitable? How do we make sure that disabled folks are able to participate? One of the things that one of my colleagues mentioned doing, which I thought was just incredible, is when they did protests and marches, they made sure that if there were anyone with wheelchairs or mobility issues, that they were at the front, because it meant that the members of the community that were disabled were not going to be left behind. And not only that, they made a decision that because there were disabled people in their group, that they would stick together. That's powerful. Can we imagine a movement, an action, a protest that centered the lives of disabled people? How incredible would that be? Last week I had a conversation with a friend, and I want to bring this up because I'm going to speak for myself, and I will say that I oftentimes navigate and struggle with what does full accessibility look like. I want to name this because sometimes fear gets in our way of doing and moving forward. I have a friend who is deaf and hard of hearing. I have lots of friends who are. I have a cousin as well, but this particular friend, I'm aware that I have oftentimes hesitated to meet with them because of not being aware of if I had the right things needed to talk, not knowing if my captioning will operate properly. And something shifted, and in a conversation with him, changed some of those thoughts, as well as constant reflections on myself. And one of the things he said to me is, oftentimes hearing people forget that we're just like y'all. And that's important, right? It is really important for that remembering, because I know I often get frustrated and agitated when people exclude me from an equation because they feel as if they don't have what is needed to allow me to be present, as well as to navigate through access needs. And so during this process and this journey, I found myself saying, Enzi, what is this about? Why are you so hesitant to check in and meet with a person who you've been chatting with? And I gotta tell you that ableism is real, right? We get afraid of making mistakes really easily. And those of you who have heard me talk about anti-Black racism and trainings and equity, you know that I often talk about we will make mistakes. That is normal. That is a part of our life and a part of how we operate and who we are. But what we do with those mistakes perhaps is really what is extremely important. I'm not perfect. I think that oftentimes we find ourselves in situations where we are just going with the flow and feeling as if we are fumbling around, not sure how to navigate things. And then we push ourselves. We continue to push ourselves harder and harder in order to make change, in order to make a difference. And in the process of doing that, we very seldom rest. I very seldom rest. I don't really sleep through the night. And I've constantly asked myself, what does Shabbat mean? What does rest mean? Because we live in such a capitalist society that the concept of rest doesn't happen. And we live in a capitalist society that tells us that our worth is directly connected to the things that we are able to accomplish. And those things are rooted really clearly in this work ethic that could be connected really close to white supremacy culture. And yet we are in a place to figuring out and not really sure how do we dismantle this, right? Because I believe the common denominator when we talk about equity is disability. If we could figure out disability justice and disability rights, perhaps all the things else will fall into place. Not everything, right? But many things may potentially fall into place. I once told a friend that capitalism is the biggest barrier to accessibility. And I believe that. And we see that over and over again. So, what does this mean about us, about the ways in which we live our lives, and about disability in itself? One, I want to encourage you, especially if you are disabled, even if you're not, right? But if you need to rest, I encourage you to rest. I encourage you to take care of yourself and do what is needed to survive and to thrive, because those are extremely important things and abilities to be able to do. I'm going to ask you a question, though. What is the biggest fear that you have in embracing your authentic self if you are disabled or struggling with aspects of your identity? How can you navigate through that? And if you are not disabled, how do you show up as accomplices with colleagues and comrades and other folks that may be disabled? And I ask that question knowing that every single person on the face of this earth has the potential of becoming disabled at any given moment. And so, how do we navigate and create a world that is inclusive, right? A world that if any of us were to become incapable of working the next day or incapable of doing something, how will we want the world and society to treat us and to embrace us? I want to name that too often some of us who navigate the world in different realities have walked around feeling isolated, feeling different, not really sure of how we fit in, where we fit in, or why we fit in. And learning to embrace the difference in who we are and who I am is such a journey and a process that is struggle non-stop, and yet it is worth the struggle. It is very much worth the struggle. What does disability pride mean? How do we have pride in who we are? I want to remind us that there is a huge overlap between the disability community and the queer community, as well as so many other overlaps. And a reminder that our bodies are so sacred, even when our bodies feel as if they are betraying us. It is sacred. And what I want us to navigate through and to try to think about is, how are we supporting those who may have different realities than ourselves? What are some of the things that we can do to support or stand out? I encourage you to start reading up on disability justice, on disability rights, on accessibility, and ways in which you can make your place accessible, in ways in which you can make your community available and attainable by all of our community, particularly those of us who are disabled. I want to do a little note also about chronic health issues. And the reason why I want to say a little bit about chronic health issues is because, unfortunately, oftentimes we find ourselves trying to encourage and cheer other people up. But chronic means that it is not going away and it's constant. And so sometimes when a friend says, I hope you feel better, or something along those lines, I find myself getting frustrated because I may have moments of feeling better, but I'm not getting better. It's not going to change. It's just a part of who I am and how I operate the world. And that is okay. And that doesn't mean it's not easy. That doesn't mean it's not stressful and frustrating. But what it does mean is how do we navigate through it? And what it also means is when our peers are assuming that we're going to get better, or not really assuming, and oftentimes they mean it in a sincere way. For me, in the past, it has elicited shame because I know that no matter how hard I work, that this is a part of my reality. And then, so how do I do the right things? How do I navigate through my reality? It's not always easy. Sometimes it's very stressful and complicated and frustrating. This other aspect about chronic pain and chronic health, and really any of us who may be disabled, some just really key things. And really I want to talk about what does consent look like when we're talking to folks. I encourage folks, when you are talking with a friend who mentions being tired or sleepy, or you know that they have pain and constant pain, it is really simple and easy to say, have you tried yoga? Have you tried drinking a glass of water? Have you tried? Here's the thing. Oftentimes folks who are disabled or who have chronic pain issues have tried many other things that you're suggesting. So as a suggestion, I would suggest maybe starting off by saying, I have some suggestions. Would you be interested in hearing some things that may have worked for me? And the person may say, nah, not really. I have looked into this and tried so many things, and right now I am just okay. And if you don't do that, that's okay. But be prepared that if you offer unsolicited advice and suggestions, be prepared for the person to push back and say, that's not what I asked for. I have tried those things already. Please do not give me unsolicited advice. And when that happens, it's okay to say, oh, my bad. I won't do that. But before we get to that part, it's okay to ask, can I offer these suggestions to you? Because that's important. We don't want to make assumptions about what is reality or not reality for people's real lives. And before I get ready to go, I want to make a small note about really about disability and about all of these things of what it means to be alive, what it means to thrive, and how we can navigate through the world. Really, what I want to encourage you to do is to always embrace your full and authentic self. Again, like I said, it's Disability Pride Month, and if anything you take away from this episode, I want you to remember that, one, we do not have marriage equality as long as disabled people are not able to get married without losing their benefits. Two, what does accessibility look like? How can you allow for accessibility in your spaces, in your community? Third, consent. If you can, before asking or offering advice, please ask those that you're offering that advice to, because they may not need it and they may not want it at that time. I am really excited that I was able to have this conversation with you all. Again, this is Enzi with Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality more than just skin deep. Looking forward to chatting with you all again next time. Until then, Have a great one.